Hello and welcome back to the Life Nurse Podcast. Hope you all are doing well. Got a couple things I want to discuss about the vintage watch market, ironically. I know a lot of the times we cover, modern watch releases, things that are happening with sort of the modern sphere of watch collecting and watch enthusiasm. I do obviously cover things in the vintage market as well, and I think last episode we were saying that, we would do an episode where we'd cover some of the new watch releases. From the last, couple of weeks, being that we've kind of focused pretty heavily on vintage watches. We had our coverage of the New York watch auctions, the summer New York watch auctions, which I think was really great. We'll touch on those in this episode a little bit, but I'll focus on really two stories that I want to discuss. The first has to do with the famous artist Jon Lennon and his Patek Philippe reference 2499. And then I would like to discuss a really great article that was written by a really well-known vintage watch dealer. And I want to kind of give you my thoughts and also just put a link in the show notes because I really think it was very well articulated. So to kick this episode off, I want to start off with a really famous reference 2499. So if you don't know, reference 2499 is... from Patek Philippe is a perpetual calendar chronograph that is known by many as being one of the most important wristwatches ever produced, one of the most interesting and collectible it comes from sort of a line of watches from Patek Philippe that's really, really interesting. Obviously, perpetual calendar chronographs and Patek Philippe have really long history. Many of you may know the reference 1518 as the first serially produced perpetual calendar chronograph from Patek Philippe. The 2499 is another example of this complication from Patek Philippe, and to many is a holy grail of a watch. The thing with these watches, though, is they were produced in very low quantities. The 2499 is part of a production run that is said to include less than 350 watches. And so getting your hands on a 2499 is extremely important and it's extraordinarily rare. Now, obviously watches with provenance are really, really important. And there was a photo of Jon Lennon that was taken where he was holding up his wrist and there was a watch on his wrist, and many identified it as being a reference 2499. There were also sort of, stories and lore that the reference 2499 that Jon Lennon was wearing in that photo was a Tiffany signed 2499. So if for those of you who don't know, Patek Philippe and Tiffany Co had and have a relationship where Tiffany sells Patek Philippe watches in their storefronts, and when they sell those watches, the dials of the watch are signed with Tiffany Co. And so you may have heard of folks referring to these watches as double signed Tiffany Co. watches, or Tiffany stamped, or just a Tiffany Patek. These are extraordinarily rare, extraordinarily difficult to find on the vintage market. But additionally, if you are looking to get a Tiffany signed Patek Philippe on the modern side, you really have to have a true relationship with Tiffany, and a pretty long track record of being a client with them. So there was a lot of sort of gossip around the fact that this 2499 might have been Tiffany signed, and over the last couple of years, it's kind of come out that yes, this 2499 exists. Yes, it is Tiffany signed, but the whereabouts of this watch were kind of unknown up until recently, when, and I think we covered this on an episode of the podcast, when it was released that this watch was part of some legal action in Switzerland, where this watch was basically said to have been stolen and it needed to be returned to its original owner. Now, to give you a little bit more information about the actual 2499, this watch was a gift from Yoko Ono to Jon Lennon about 2 months before he passed, and this obviously is an extraordinary gift, and when Jon Lennon passed, obviously Yoko Ono kept the watch. In August of 2023, a Swiss federal court ruling basically brought to light the fact that this watch was in existence and that it had traded hands a couple of times and was going to be auctioned, but was withdrawn from the auction because of the controversy surrounding the fact that it was likely stolen. So there's a lot of rumors about how this sort of came about, but obviously Yoko Ono kept the watch after Jon Lennon passed away, and there are rumors that her chauffeur either stole it or was given it by Yoko Ono, depending on what side of the story you're reading. And then I believe that the chauffeur ended up, selling it on, and I think it traded hands within the dealer network, and then eventually found its way into almost being part of the Auctionata auction in 2013. Now, what's really incredible is there's been some research that's being done by the New Yorker, by the New Yorker to bring to light some more information about this watch. And what's really cool is that the New Yorker actually was able to identify, to get its hands on the pictures that the auction house had taken of this reference 2499. These pictures confirm that it is a 2499 Tiffany signed watch. Additionally, there was actually an incredible engraving on the caseback of this watch that says, it starts with in parentheses it says just like, and then it says just like starting over, love Yoko, 10/9/1980 NYC. This is an incredible bit of news to really come out. I think it really confirms what has been rumors up until this point, but it was kind of thought of as being real as well. But this is obviously living, breathing proof that this watch does exist, and it shows the significance of this 2499. Now, what's really important to know is that the legal proceedings that I mentioned before that came out, in August 2023 have not concluded. So I believe the legal proceedings basically are the fact that I think Yoko Ono is basically suing to have the watch returned to her, being that her claims of the watch being stolen and it needs to be returned to its rightful owner. Now, whether or not that will happen, I think we're still waiting to hear if that will, the conclusion of the federal court proceedings. So we'll see what ends up happening there. But I think it would be ignorant of us to believe that whoever ends up in the possession of this watch wouldn't look to probably sell this watch at some point. When that happens, I don't know. It probably will be quite a few years after the legal proceedings. I think it would be a bad look for whoever ends up getting this watch to put it at auction straight away. I think if you want to know what greed looks like, I think that's exactly what that would end up doing. But what is really, obviously circling the watch market is, what would this 2499 go for? I think the provenance of this watch is extremely significant. Jon Lennon obviously is an incredibly iconic artist and really someone that is relevant to, I would say, today's, collecting community. Sometimes when you speak about provenance in watches, it's hard to relate to the provenance of specific pieces when you don't have sort of a direct connection with the where the provenance is. So maybe it's an actor that you just don't know about, and it's hard to connect with it. You kind of have to, live through others when discussing the provenance of watches. But Jon Lennon, being such an incredible icon, really would speak to all kinds of collectors. In addition, this is a reference 2499, which is an extremely collectible reference from Patek Philippe. On top of that is a Tiffany signed 2499, which is even more rare. So I think I would hasten to guess that I think when this watch comes to auction, no matter when it actually does, it will likely be I think it will be the most expensive watch to sell at auction, period, given its provenance, given the fact that it's Tiffany signed, given that it's a Patek Philippe 2499. But I'd love to hear your thoughts, so let me know what you think. But it's so cool that this has been unearthed and more information has come about, and so cool to be able to see pictures of this watch. I'll leave a link in the show notes to this episode to the New Yorker article. I highly encourage you to read it. It's really great, great bit of journalism. So please take a look at that if you would like. There will be a link in the show notes of this episode. Next up, I wanted to discuss an incredible article that was written by Alex Ciani about the state of the vintage watch market. For those of you who don't know, Alex Ciani is an incredibly influential and probably one of the best vintage watch dealers on the market. He's been doing this for an extremely long time and has a wealth of knowledge when it comes to all things watches, watch dealing, vintage watch market, all of that kind of thing. And he posted a video on Instagram kind of describing the fact that he had released this article, and obviously I decided to have a read about it. I decided to read the article, and the title of the article is the vintage watch market plummeting and why I welcome that? So for those of you who have been watching the watch auctions that have taken place, and I'll kind of just quote what the article says, the recent auction results seem to have raised concerns around dealers and collectors alike, showing a downward trend of trading prices for the first time in about 30 years. And what Alex basically goes into in this article is why this is happening, sort of historically, how we got to this point, and what this means for watch collecting going forward. I think what's really great about this article is it documents a lot of what came before this time and what and sort of his experience throughout sort of the life cycle of this watch market that we have had the opportunity to be a part of. But I think the crux of it is the fact that, you know, the recent auction results have been slower than let's say previous years, and the prices that these watches are fetching are plateauing or really, you know, have come down pretty dramatically. I think over the last 3 or 4 years, you've definitely seen modern watches come down in prices substantially, given there was so much hype around these pieces. And I think today this year, we've still seen some slumping in modern watch prices on the secondary market. Of course, the vintage watch market is not immune to these price fluctuations, and I think we're seeing price changes of these watches happening in a similar way. You know, some lots that you would expect to go for more than what they do at the auctions this summer, they just didn't fetch you know, those incredible prices. And Alex, you know, in the article, and I won't spoil the whole article here, but one thing that he did say was, you know, the collector is very well educated now, and the collector is looking for has a very specific taste and looking for very specific things when they're purchasing vintage watches, and this is driving a lot of the decisions and also the prices of these watches. Just to give you an example, you know, if you look at the Paul Newman Daytona, these watches, you know, any condition of a Paul Newman Daytona used to go for fairly good money. But what we're seeing, or at least I saw this over the summer, or I guess over the May auctions, was these watches, the ones in very good condition went, you know, for good money, and those without maybe that the condition that one would want were relatively flat. And I think that's just a trend in you know, collectors getting more and more educated about what they want to look for, their interests in vintage watches, what they want to look for watches that they would wear on their wrists or have in their collections. And I think, to be honest, I think it's a really great thing. I don't want to spoil the article too much, but I kind of agree with a lot of Alex's points in the article. I think having some sort of reset is really important, and being realistic in these prices is also, I think, a very important piece of making sure that the market doesn't overheat too much, and, you know, it's still a place where you can enjoy watches, and not be, spending a crazy amount of money. But I really think the whole education piece is what's really advanced this market quite far. I think he likens it to art, and basically says, in the watch market is now understanding who, or I guess what pieces are like a Michelangelo, or what pieces are like a Monet, and I think that's a maturing of the vintage watch market, vintage watch collecting sphere, and I think it's great for the industry as a whole. So as I did with the New Yorker article for Jon Lennon, $24.99, there will be a link in the description to Alex's article. I really encourage you, if you want to understand from a industry veteran his perspective on what has happened to the market and why and where we're going to going forward, and why this is something that should be welcomed. If you want to read those thoughts, I highly encourage you to check out the link in the show notes of this podcast. I think that'll about do it for this episode of the Life on the Wrist podcast. Thank you so much for watching. If you are new to Life on the Wrist, be sure to follow us so you're notified when we upload our podcasts. And if you wouldn't mind sharing this episode or this podcast with a friend who is interested in watches, it really does help grow this podcast and helps us reach new audiences, and gives the podcast visibility. So that would be a great favor of mine. If you want to discuss any of the topics that we've discussed in this podcast, be sure to hit us up on our website or on the Life on the Wrist Instagram page. We also have Facebook, X, all the social media links will be in the show notes of this podcast. If you are feeling generous and wouldn't mind rating this podcast, it really does help me out. With that said, guys, thank you so much for listening to this podcast, and until next time.